there has been this amplification of entrepreneurship as this cool thing. It was really, really hard to manage, even though they were the smartest, well-intentioned individuals. So long story short, find a safety net. It's very important that you have your personal ambition defined. That, in my opinion, is the most beautiful way that you can think about your business.
There's nothing more romantic than to start your own business, become an entrepreneur, dream of multi-billion-dollar valuations. But there are certain things that you need to know from the best in the business who've been there. And today we have joining us on MSME Exchange, Ankur Warikoo, has dons many different hats. That of an entrepreneur primarily, has gone through various reinventions and reincarnations as an entrepreneur. Works with people who are looking at becoming an entrepreneur. So welcome to MSME Exchange, Ankur. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Malini. Pleasure.
So as we discussed the last time, would you kind of take me through, you do a course on entrepreneurship, I think, and it's quite a popular course where you basically promise to return money, and you do return a lot of money because people opt out after the first course, where they kind of discourage people from becoming entrepreneurs. Could you take us through that, and like what is it that you tell people that they kind of say, okay, not for me?
This is my favorite example of all time. So the course that I run, Malini, it's a fairly long course. It's about a 16-hour course. And in the very first module itself, the first 15 odd minutes, I basically lay out all the wrong reasons to become an entrepreneur. And not surprisingly, the biggest number of refund requests come right after those first 15 minutes, because then people are like, bhai, samajh mein aa gaya, ye hamare liye nahi hai, and we will just opt out. And that makes me so happy, because it just prevents somebody from having gone through some random journey that they thought would be, in your words, romantic and all hunky-dory, only to realize that that's nearly not the case. And I believe that the reason is because in the last 10 years, for all the right reasons, there has been this amplification of entrepreneurship as this cool thing, to the extent that people now diss at those who have a job. They're like, oh, 9 to 5, you sold your soul, you've become part of that corporate slave. But all of that is just such bad advice, because it suggests that entrepreneurship is the only way to redeeming yourself. And I believe that there is this entire generation that is desiring entrepreneurship as a line without recognizing what it truly means. So here are the 3 things that I share in those 15 minutes. I say, if you choose to become an entrepreneur because of any of these 3 reasons, it's the wrong one. Number 1, you want to become an entrepreneur because you want to make money. Statistically, you are far worse off making money as an entrepreneur than you will be if you would have a very nice straight line professional career. Like if you were to do your job diligently well, be nice, happy, show up at work, get those performance appraisals, those increments, those promotions, and all of that, you have a far predictable way of making money, perhaps in a slower but in a systematic way, than for you to gamble your 0 to 1 odds and say, ek din something big will happen and I'll become like this unicorn and have money. Because there's so many phases that one requires to pass to actually make real money as a founder. You have to have a business idea that works. You then have to start generating revenue. You then have to start doing it profitably. Then you maybe need an investor who believes in you and bets on you. You then need to get to a certain size and scale. You then need to have an exit where you suddenly have that money coming in. And the funnel goes so thin that the odds of you succeeding, let alone making money, is just way against that. You would not play that gamble in real life, but you would otherwise. Number 2 reason of wanting to become an entrepreneur, because you hate your current life. So many people are like, I hate my job. I don't want to do this. I hate my life. I don't want to do this. I hate this. I hate that. And that's why I want to do that. It's almost always the wrong reason. You're running away from something without recognizing what you're getting into, and that you're setting yourself up for failure. Third, and this is the biggest reason, in today's generation. I want to become an entrepreneur because everybody else is becoming one. It's this FOMO that is driving you. You really don't care about it. Like, funny enough, I just had a conversation with somebody in Bangalore, super smart guy, graduated from IIT, is now working in a really nice tech company in Bangalore, enviable role, enviable money, and like startup karna hai. क्यों करना है? क्योंकि बैंगलोर में हर वक्त कर रहा है. Like, that's not the reason. You do recognize that you have something which can set you up for a wonderful life, and maybe you can decide to become one after 5 years. But for you to want to do it right away, when you're 3 months into your role in this really cool company, graduating from one of the finest universities in this country, why? And it's only because everybody else is doing it. You're sitting in this coffee shop and you're hearing pitches here, and you're saying, business models being built there. You're seeing those MacBooks and you're seeing all those cool ESOPs being liquidated, and you fall for that trap. And that almost always sets you up for the wrong one. So as long as you have the right interest and approach towards entrepreneurship, which in my opinion is you love solving problems to the extent that you actually don't care whether it's solved or not. You just love solving them. So you are always in love with the problem, not the solution. So many entrepreneurs fall in love with the solution, then they blind themselves to anything else. And that's a disaster, because your solution is inevitably going to change. But as long as you're centered on the problem and you love digging at the problem, gnawing at that problem every single day, that, in my opinion, is the entrepreneurial mindset.
In India, Ankur, a lot of people get into entrepreneurship because, there aren't that many jobs. We don't have the industrial kind of jobs that you have perhaps in some of the other countries. And therefore, they are not qualified for a white collar job. And therefore, like I was talking to one of the women who live in Madurai, and after her husband died, she had no choice but to get into that, because she wasn't qualified. She didn't speak English and all of that, but she learned it along the way. And now she sells online. I think there are many such people in India. What are the hacks for those people? What is it that somebody like you tells a woman like that, or a man who really can't get a job, he can't work for a cool startup, can never think of becoming a CX? So what kind of hacks do you have for them?
Yeah, no, and it's such a great forum to be talking about this, because we're speaking to medium, small enterprises, people who are yearning and are ambitious enough to become big and still are at a certain scale that doesn't qualify that. We are a country of entrepreneurs. If you really think about it, every single family in this country would have someone or the other who has a shop, who has their own outfit. It's perhaps small, 2, 3 people, maybe 5, 10 at best. And that is still entrepreneurship. It's self-employment to the extent that you're paying for yourself, for your family, and a few others who work for you. It may not be as cool and sexy as, oh my God, I'm raising millions of dollars of money and I'm this unicorn and that thing, blah, blah, blah. But it's still a very, very respectable way of earning a livelihood. And in fact, serves as the reason for most livelihoods in this country. Whether you run your own cab and now you have expanded to having 2 cabs of your own or 3 cabs of your own. I know of so many people who have built this network of food delivery partners working for either Zomato or Swiggy, and that's become like a thing of its own. So they've actually orchestrated people so that they could be available at the times that e-commerce company requires it, or a food delivery company requires it, or a fast grocery company requires it, and so on. And it's ingenuous how much we get this. It's like in our DNA. So what I tell people is, it's very, very important to recognize what your personal ambition is and marry it to the opportunity that you're going after. What do I mean by that? I know of so many super smart people, Malini, extremely ambitious, but working in an opportunity that will never be enough for them. And what will happen is they'll find themselves on that treadmill. They will keep running. They will keep sweating. They will keep panting, but they will not move an inch forward. And they'll keep cursing themselves and the market and everything else. But they wouldn't recognize, you know what? The opportunity is not big enough for you. And I have experienced that in my own world. When Nearby was the startup that I was running, I recognized over a period of time, and it took me time to do that, that we're not in a very big opportunity. Whatever we're doing at nearby is contingent on the disposable income that this country generates. And that's not a lot of it, because most of Indians just earn enough to pay for the necessary needs and wants. So for them to go out and splurge on dining, for them to go out and pamper themselves, spa and massages, or entertain themselves beyond movies, nah, doesn't happen. We're not yet that country. We'll get there, but not right now. So suddenly you're faced with that opportunity limitation or that glass ceiling, but you are ambitious in your own right, and that is a mismatch. On the other extreme, I see so many people who are like, you know what? I want to run something which makes me happy, gives me time enough to do things that I want to do, spend time with my family, travel, read, whatever is it that I fancy. I don't want to kill myself doing this, but they are in this mega competitive, super high value opportunity. And what happens? They feel overwhelmed all the time. They just completely awed and negatively so by everything that they are experiencing on a daily basis. They're like, oh my God, am I not good enough? Am I not smart enough? How am I not getting this? This is so big than what I imagine it to be. Should I be doing this and that? And then they just lose themselves. So it's very important that you have your personal ambition defined. And there is no shame. Let me be the one saying this on record. Being the person who has raised multiple millions of dollars, now is running a bootstrap business. So I get both sides of the picture. There is no shame in wanting to run a small outfit and wanting to run it slowly. Because if you really go back in history and see what has been the foundation of this country's business growth, it has been driven by true traditional dhanda. Like dhanda in the right way, that focused on profits on day one, made it slow, made whatever profits it was, reinvested it back into the business, dheere, dheere, dheere karke, whether it's Reliance, whether it's Tata, whether it's Airtel, whether it's any story that you pick up that you have been inspired by, all of them have gone through it the clinically boring way, not the cool, sexy, raise millions of dollars, burn it way. And that has no shame attached to it. There is no guilt attached to it. There should be no embarrassment attached to it. It's a wonderful way, but admittedly, a slow way of building it out. And that, in my opinion, is the most beautiful way that you can think about your business. If you have that personal ambition, I want to generate good, healthy cash flows. I want to do it consistently over a period of time. Leave something for my family, leave something for somebody else to take over, do a great job of it, then please go ahead and do that. I recently, and this is something that we have all said, we know how Zoho is, we know of how Zerodha is. Zerodha just released its results. 4,900 crores of revenue, 2,000 crores of profit, never raised a single dollar. The brothers have been at it for 15 years. Nobody knew of them for the first 10. Now everybody's talking about them. And like, bhai, hum to 15 saal se lage hue the. तुमने अभी हमें attention दी है, but हम तो ये 15 साल से कर रहे हैं, हमारी पूरी जिंदगी इसको करने में चली गई है. And that is what true business, according to me, is. But it will be slow, it will be boring, it will not get the attention early on, but there is joy and merit on building that dheere dheere karke, and then recognizing that the opportunity has grown along with you and your ambition.
I was talking to, that's extremely important, because when it's a slow burn, it's not going to be like instantaneous, right? But again, I was talking to one of the women who started out, and I said, what is the biggest challenge that you faced? And she said, the biggest challenge is when you go to do anything and you go to market with your product, service, whatever. And she said, the first few months, it could be years, but you will not find takers. And she said, that's exactly the time you don't give up.
Yeah.
But it does get frustrating, as I said, that it is a lonely journey. It is, you need validation. At times, it doesn't come at the time you want it. So persistence and consistency, like, to go after it. What kind of a mental makeup, I think, do you need to have at different points of time? And what is it that should tell you that this is the time to give up and this is not the time to give up? That's something that I don't get.
That's a great question, Malini. And And allow me to address it multiple ways. Number one is, and you may not be in this position, but if you are, please consider yourself privileged and use that to your benefit. Let's say you have a job, and it's a job that pays you well. It's a job that pays the bills. It's a job that you may not see yourself doing for the rest of your life, but there isn't fundamentally anything wrong with that job. And you do want to then taste the joy of entrepreneurship and see what it does. Please don't be a fool to quit your job and then try that. That's just genuinely dumb, because it's not being smart. It's like taking a massive risk without even recognizing what that risk is. So what I often say, and that's contrary to most advice that you would find popularly in the market out there, please stick with your job and just do enough. Just do enough to not get fired. Just do enough to not have anyone ever point a finger at you that you are doing something wrong. So do it diligently, but don't overdo it. Don't be like, I want to become the employee of the month. I want to become the employee of the year. Just do whatever keeps it at bay. Get that money, let it pay for the bills, and focus 100% of your attention on culling out as much time as you can for yourself. Your nights, your weekends, your holidays, anything that you can, to work towards this plan, this idea of yours. It could be testing out a new business idea. It could be testing out a side hustle. It could be testing out multiple ideas. It could be creating a product, investing whatever excess money you earn from your salary towards that, but doing it drip wise, right? It's not some mega event. It's just dheere, dheere, dheere karke, day in and day out. But what happens because of this is, number one, you don't put the pressure of making money from day one on your passion. So it actually gets time to breathe and to develop as an entity. Number two, you figure out whether there is actually merit in it or not, because then the romance has gone out. The early excitement of starting something new will very quickly fade away. You'll get into the daily realities of it. And then you'll like, yeah, दूर से तो बड़ा अच्छा लगता था. लेकिन अब जब करने बैठे हैं, you're recognizing sales नहीं हो रही हैं. People are not reacting favorably. The product needs development. The strategy needs a reorientation. The marketing needs more finesse. So you actually get that time to work on it because you have no pressure of making ends meet. It's being done somewhere else. And that over a period of time, 6, 12, 18, 24 months, jaldi kya hai? You will get to that answer. And that answer then will be a very confident answer. Whether it's a yes or a no, doesn't matter. You will know for a fact that it is conclusive. I want to do this because it makes sense. I've seen early results and it's taken me this time to get here, but I can't. You know what? Even after these 2 years, I'm not seeing results. It'll be stupid of me to now quit my job and see that would make the difference. Nah, not going to work. Of course, this suggestion does not work if you are under some circumstance that forces you to do that. So the story that you were sharing, somebody lost her husband. Now she has to make those ends meet. And that really becomes a hard situation. And my absolute respect to such individuals, because it's very, very hard to make that happen. And you have no choice at that point of time but to just fight your way through, get whatever is it that gets your momentum building, whether it's setting up a quick store, whether it's selling something which is fundamental daily needs, grocery, just starting that small and making sure that then becomes your job that I was talking about right now, that pays for the bills, so that you get the opportunity to perhaps try something that you always wanted to, but you couldn't on day one. So long story short, find a safety net that is not about, if I fail, I will land here. No, it's about, I have this, so I don't have to put the pressure of making money on the thing that I truly want to do. It can actually go through its round of failures, its round of reorientation, its pivots to land up where it should be, which gives me the confidence that this is what I want to do and why.
Awesome. I'm going to come to the next question, which is occurring to me, is about capital. And I recall a conversation where you were very specific when you said that my new venture, which is not going to raise capital, it's not going to, it's going to remain bootstrapped, we are going to fund it through internal accruals. What about capital? The importance of capital.
Yeah.
And how should you fund a business? Because there are lots of entities today who are willing to lend to enterprises, right? There's again a very inspiring story of a 17-year-old boy who dropped out of school in Panipat because of the lockdown and Corona. Um, and then he started selling doormats because Panipat is like the hub that supplies doormats to the rest of the country. And soon he ran out of supplies and he wanted to set up his own. So he's now set up a manufacturing facility, and from zero, his business has gone to 20-25 lakhs a month in revenues.
Wow.
And I asked him, what's your biggest problem? He said, capital. He said, I want to expand, but humko koi paisa deta nahi hai. If it was not for the seller platforms, etc., he would have found it difficult and etc. So capital, I think, has many colors. It's debt, it's equity, sometimes it's internal accruals, you sell your jewelry or pledge your, whatever. So how should you look at funding a business? Because you clearly have gone through that entire cycle and then some wisdom has occurred.
Sure.
So how do you fund a business? Can you sort of explain that?
Yeah. So there are multiple ways of doing that. The traditional way of doing it is to gather capital from friends and family network. This has been the long drawn way of how India has gotten to the point that it has. Almost all MSMEs and almost all large businesses had the genesis where some uncle, maybe father, mother itself, yeah, kuch bech ke gathered some little money, started small, and then dheere, dheere, dheere karke, it happened through the accruals of the business itself. It started making profit, reinvested back, and get it done. So this is the non-glamorous way of doing it. This is the non-sharp tankish way of doing it. This is like the straight line, boring way of doing it. And the risk attached to that is it's your money or it's your reputation online. So if, God forbid, it doesn't work out, there are repercussions around that. Then the second piece is debt. And debt is usually the way any large company will continue to grow. So if you cared enough and you had that interest and you glanced into the financial reports of all publicly listed company in India or elsewhere, even globally, you'll recognize that a bulk of their capital needs. ऐसा नहीं है कि Reliance इतनी बड़ी कंपनी है तो उसे पैसा नहीं चाहिए, या Tata इतनी बड़ी कंपनी है तो उसे पैसा नहीं चाहिए. Everybody needs money for new projects, for one-time expenses, for capital expenditure, whatnot. So they go to the markets, and these markets are usually banks. So banks will lend them money, and huge amounts of money, and they will, just like us as retail customers, pay an interest on that loan and eventually pay off that loan. But what tends to happen is you need to have a collateral for that. Like, there has to be some confidence that the bank has that the debt or that loan will be repaid back. This is where, unfortunately, most MSMEs fail, not because of their own fault, but because they don't have anything to collateralize. It's still a young setup. What will they put in as anything that is girvi and so on? So usually what tends to happen is there are banks that will give you a loan based on your order book. So they'll be like, okay, I can't give it to you because you have machinery or you have a factory or you have some assets to collateralize, but you have a confirmed order book of the kind of revenue you're going to make over the next 6-12 months. And you've got a good order book, a solid order book from customers that we can perhaps trust. Basis that we can give you a loan. There are organizations now which give you short-term loan basis the collections that you do on a daily frequent basis. Nearby was a good example. Nearby used to work with restaurants, spa salons. These are classic cases of people who wouldn't get credit. But because they had a running business with Nearby, and if Nearby in some way said, you know what, this is the kind of business this restaurant spa salon does on a monthly basis. So you could get a loan, say 50% of that amount, and then Nearby will be responsible for deducting that EMI and then paying the rest back to the merchant when it makes that collection. And there are businesses that cater to specifically such kind of operations where you have a nice, happy, recurring collection business, and because of that, you get a working capital loan or a short-term loan. There are a lot of government schemes that give loans at almost 0% interest or really low interest. It depends on state to state. It depends on the nature and the size of the business as well, the industry that you are functioning in. So you'll have to do your homework to recognize that. It's not always easy, but it's not impossible for a fact. And then finally, the new age way of raising capital, which is equity. And equity means that you are not taking a loan. You're not taking any obligation from somebody who's a friend or a family as well. You're going to who would be a professional investor, and they would give you money to buy a certain percentage of your company as a shareholder. And the obligation thereon is for you to give a return for that percentage, whether that return comes through an eventual exit that you sell the company or you go public and you list yourself on the stock market, or through dividends that you keep paying to the shareholders, of which one of it is an investor itself. That has in some way no obligation attached to it. And that's why it's become really cool. But it's also something that people don't fully understand. People think, अरे वाह, हम लोगों के पास जाएंगे, investor से पैसा मांगेंगे, and they will give us the money, and that's awesome. What they don't think through is the second, third, fourth, fifth order consequence of that decision. The investor are in the business of entering and exiting businesses. They're not in the business of loving your business. They couldn't care two hoots about who you are. What they care about is, are we entering at the right price point? Are we exiting at the right price point? And is that exit price point higher than the entry price point? Simple, because they have a return to ensure to their investors as well. So they are looking for that exit. And that means implicitly, when you agree to raise money from an investor as equity, you are agreeing to continuously for the rest of your life raise money from somebody, because that's the only way that you give a return or an exit to the previous investor, that you keep raising till the point that you eventually go public. And even then, it doesn't stop. It really doesn't. I remember a conversation with Deep Kalra from Make My Trip. And Deep is one of the almost fathers of the Indian internet, started way back when there was no internet in this country. And he told me that when I went public with Make My Trip, I felt, "Arey wah, ho gaya," like it was over. And it's now that he realizes, after having gone public for almost a decade and more now, that that was just the start. It wasn't the end, because ever since he has been raising, he has been buying, he has been selling, and it's just gotten harder, if anything, than the easier thing that he thought it would be. And that's just true for every business out there. There is no end to raising money if that is what you rely on. So I often go back to what Sanjeev Bikhchandani of Naukri said. He said that the best money is that which comes from the customers. And if you can get into the habit of raising money from customers, you will never, ever have a problem. And credit to him, InfoEdge as a company is such a great example, wonderful cash flows, and just clinically doing such a great job of reinvesting into multiple businesses, into this own business, building assets all across. And I think that's such a wonderful way, but again, admittedly boring way of looking at it. So a lot of people check out and say, "Nahi, ye nahi karna, itni fight nahi marni, we'll do it the cool way." But these are the different ways of doing it. Friends and family to start with, debt in multiple shapes and form, and please use that as much as you can. And then finally, equity, which is the new age one.
Super. We are again, you've gone through this entire cycle of, Groupon, employee, then raising money, entrepreneurial journey, and now there is a new venture and a new you almost, right? Why don't you explain how you've changed as an entrepreneur, and what was your biggest failure?
Yeah.
And what did you learn from it?
Sure. So in hindsight, having done it for 14 years, Malini, I would say that the hardest thing is to actually build a really good team that can deliver on what is it that's needed to be delivered. The reason I say it's hard is because people are people, and we are also humans. We're emotional, we're unpredictable, we have our own highs and lows, we have our own biases, we have our own worldviews. We're not robots. So while we may think that we are hiring a graphic designer, a software engineer, a marketer, an HR professional, we're actually engaging and getting into a relationship with a human. And that makes it so hard, because you might want to tell them something a certain way. They will interpret it in a certain way. They will communicate that further on to somebody else in a certain way. And by the time the actual work gets done, that chain of communication and that interpretation of it has been so lost that you will find a completely different way of how it was being done to what it is right now. And there are classic examples of that. Like Nearby was one of them, where we bloated very quickly because we started recruiting people all way, and we were a completely geographically dispersed company across 33 cities in the country, having offices in 13 cities of the country. So suddenly we had people everywhere, and it was really, really hard to manage, even though they were the smartest, well-intentioned individuals. But just the communication of how things were used to break it down. And as much of slack Elon Musk is getting for how he's executing Twitter, uh, it is quite telling that one can fire 75% of a company and still have a company run. It's shocking if you really think about it. But it is happening, and it's not happening because the remaining 25% are the smartest on anything. It's just happening because the layers of communication have been removed. There's just direct one-to-one fierceful communication that's happening. I would imagine, I have no idea about it, and that is what's driving action. It's not that the 75% were useless and they weren't doing anything for no fault of theirs. There were just so many layers of communication that बोलना क्या था और क्या समझ में आया और eventually क्या किया, इतना ज़्यादा अंतर था that it just didn't make sense. So that has been the hardest part. What surprisingly I've realized, and this has only happened through these 14 years of experiences, if that team gets solved, in whatever fashion it does, it doesn't mean that it always remains a small team, but there'll have to be tenets that you attach to that. You will get to a point where almost everything else will get solved, whether it's capital, whether it's demand, whether it's supply, whether it's marketing, whether it's anything else. Because you will have people thinking about that problem for you as a founder. So here's a good example of that. Last evening, I was at an event which was a beautiful gathering of women entrepreneurs from all walks of life. And one of them came up. She's been running her startup for the last 3 years. And Instagram is one of her main channels of acquisition. And she told me that because it's Instagram, she tends to get a lot of orders late night, which is when women tend to scroll through reels and maybe just winding up for the day. So that's when she's getting her orders. So she ends up having really long nights. And her husband, on the other hand, is an early riser and a very meticulous routine follower. So she said that in the last 3 years of running the startup, they haven't had an overlap on their schedule. Like it's almost as if they've started staying separate while still being married. And she doesn't like that. And I can totally understand why. So she was asking for what should she do? And I was like, why are you still managing orders after 3 years of running your startup? And she's like, no, because I'm a control freak. And like, do you hear yourself? Because that's exactly the problem. The problem is not in the business. The problem is not in the women who are buying your product. The problem is actually you. It is you and your inability to let go. Why wouldn't you find somebody who can take over you and get that job done? So my question was, do you know how to sell? He's like, yeah. Can you train somebody how to sell? He said, yeah. Like, can you find somebody who you would want to train? I was like, yeah. That's it. Khadam. Everything is solvable if you get the right people and you're willing to invest in them. So this has been my singularly most important learning, Malini. And I feel so happy that I take my hiring very seriously, and I've designed a process that works for me. And it's very slow, it's very meticulous, it's very deliberate, but it just works and works well. And that's what I would advise to everyone out there, particularly MSMEs, because they have this family business, and I'm sorry I'm using the word and I don't mean any offense, this lala mindset that ये हमारा धंधा है, हमारा business है और कोई और इसको हमसे अच्छा नहीं कर सकता. It's a fallacy. It is wrong. It's the reason why the next generation is unable to take up. It's the reason why people are unable to scale. It's the reason why you continue to be a control freak and micromanage or have the need to micromanage. Please begin to recognize कि अगर आप resources डाल के, systems डाल के, लोगों को डाल के इस business को scale करेंगे, you will find a whole new version of this business outside of you. So you have to make the business bigger than you as an entity and not attach your ego or your will to it.
Super. I agree with you. Delegation, I think, is very important. Most people forget that. And that was the thought in my head, like, why is she sitting up and managing
Exactly.
us
It's
till
so
later
obvious.
than that?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? But did you answer the question about your biggest failure, Ankur?
My biggest failure was recognizing this fact, Malini. My biggest failure was believing that marketing is the solution to our problem. Money is the solution to our problem. Having nice branding and being cool and being all talked about in the press is the solution to our problem. The right kind of product is the solution to our problem. When the truest sense was the solution to all our problems lay within the team itself. And it's not that I micromanaged, it's not that I was a control freak, but it was just that inability to recognize that people itself will come up with the right solutions and you don't have to be the one doing it or centering yourself on that solution. Instead, center yourself on the problem and just let the problem drift into the universe, because then somebody will pick it up and then make it their own. That was where I failed, and the repercussions of that was the worst things that one would expect or wish for in their founder journey. There were layoffs at Nearby, all because of my poor decision making and my inadequacy to fulfill the role as a founder, as a CEO. There were capital constraints out there. We went through really hard times. People had to suffer for no fault of theirs. We had to go through months and months of uncertainty. Our entire existence was questioned so many times, and rightfully so, because we were on the verge of dying, and we still made it. And it's surprising because we were able to go through COVID with, I'd argue, minimal damage. And if there was anything that could have actually killed our business, it was COVID, because we're all about going out. We're all about stepping out of your home, which is precisely what the world wasn't doing for 2 years. So, because we were so centered on our people, we were able to navigate through what could be the absolute death mark of our business, and that is COVID. And it's surprising that far lesser things with far lesser gravity attached to them affected us so much, because we were just thinking that they would be the reason why we would not be succeeding.
I was talking to Chicky about, since you're talking about marketing, I was asking Chicky about, marketing plans, metaverse, CAO and everything. And she said, he is his own marketer and he doesn't need me to do anything. And that's the best part, because he has some 7+ million followers. So if I'm an MSME, what is a kind of give me a marketing hack if I'm starting out as a woman entrepreneur or a small solopreneur or a business? What's a marketing hack?
It's not a hack, but it definitely works.
Okay.
Please recognize people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And that means every business needs to have a story. Every business needs to have a story. क्योंकि जितना आप अपने आप को फीचर्स पे बेचने की कोशिश करोगे, उतना ही कोई और प्रोडक्ट आपको उसी फीचर पे चकमा देके आगे निकल जाएगा. So it's never going to be an end game. But if you center yourself on your story, that's a very different thing. So irrespective of your size, please focus on your story. That story could be you as a founder. It could be you as a business. It could be you as a combination, but please center yourself on the story. One of the finest examples I have that is of Fab India. Fab India is such a brand that has been built on story in this country. There is no brand that has come as close to being a socially responsible business and being of this size. And I think the biggest reason is because they never went away from their story. They never became about, oh, we're about clothes and we're about fashion or we're about, no, never. आप उनके स्टोर में घुसेंगे, it's just stories all across of how this khadi has been made, how this silk has been made, कहाँ से ये अचार आया है, कहाँ से ये पापड़ आया है, कहाँ से ये यूटेंसिल बना है. And it's so wonderful because then people buy into that weaver who has made this as against this sari that they're buying. And that will always be the case. So I was there at an event yesterday. Brilliant founders who are innovating around recycling plastics, Malini. Incredible businesses. I got to learn so much in those 2 to 3 hours that I spent with them. And it was a pity because they didn't have a story attached to their business. And each one of them had remarkable stories attached to them. They were brilliant stories, personal stories, business stories. And I'm like, I wish every business could have a storyteller, and I wish I could plant that. But that is the hack. It's the hack. And the beauty is today, the internet has made it easy. So you don't have to be on LinkedIn. Like, if that's not your place, if that's not what makes you comfortable, don't be there. आप WhatsApp पे अपनी स्टोरियां बनाइए. आप WhatsApp के स्टोरी सेक्शन पे रोज एक स्टोरी डालिए और उसको अपना सोशल मीडिया बनाइए. Because people will share. आप Facebook पे जाइए और वहां करिए. आप जहां भी जिस फॉर्म में भी कंफर्टेबल हैं, आप उसको अपनाइए. But don't run away from stories. So as much as you sell your product, your service, your business, do as much towards selling your story as well. And you'll be shocked and surprised at how that will unfold and become the distribution that you would want, where, in say Chiki's words, you wouldn't need somebody else's help.
Super. That's very interesting. That truly is. And I do believe and agree with that, because if you have a story, whatever, sometimes these stories can become a little forced and very preachy, but I think if you genuinely have a story, that really flies and it works. I think we're running out of time, but can you recommend 3 books that, or anything that an entrepreneur should do? Because you are a big, you recommend reading a lot. So what are the 3 books would you recommend?
I would recommend, in no order, first, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. It's a terrific book by a guy called Ben Horowitz. He is the lead investor in this company called A16Z, has made wonderful investments all across. But this journey that he's documented in the book is all about the reality of founding up, reality of starting up. And it's very, very raw, very genuine, very authentic, very real. So highly recommended. Number 2, one of my favorite books is Rework. Rework is actually the book for every MSME out there in the world, because it shatters so many notions that you have about work and about how to build businesses. It's written by 2 founders, Jason Fried and DHH. They are the founders of this company called Basecamp, which is a very small, immensely profitable company, and by design. So if you really care about it, you go and read the blogs of Jason and David. It's all about how do you stay small? How do you still make a really good business? How do you value your people? How do you challenge all the notions that the world will throw on you? None of that. And Rework is that reimagination of how work can be. And the third thing, which will be not so much for the business, but for your own personal mindset, is the book called Mindset. It is by Carol Dweck. Brilliant book. It will expose you to the concept of growth versus fixed mindset, and how the growth mindset is the only way to win as an entrepreneur, and how if you can imbibe that in your way of thinking, you're set for success.
Super. Ankur Warikoo, thank you so much for talking to MSME Exchange and Business Insider's flagship event. As always, absolute pleasure having you with us. Thank you so much, Ankur.
Thank you so much, Malini. Thank you for having me. And I'm glad that you're doing this. It's necessary, it makes a difference.
Thank you.